The dust hung in the still air as the old pickup rolled to a stop before the ranch gate. It was supposed to swing open, as it had for years, but this time, something was wrong. A new lock clamped the steel chain shut, and nailed to the wooden post was a polished sign that hadn't been there before. He leaned out and read the words silently, brows tightening as he did. A woman stood nearby, arms folded, sunglasses low on her nose. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. He stepped out slowly, boots kicking gravel. Is there a reason I can't access my own property? She pointed at the sign, then at a folder in her hand. Community enforcement. The board passed new restrictions while you were gone. This gate's locked until you bring your land up to standard. He looked at her, then at the gate. The land behind it was unchanged. His cattle roamed near the creek. The same old fence still wrapped the perimeter. He exhaled slowly. You're with the HOA. I am the HOA, she replied. President, Karen Nettle. We've had complaints about your ranch activities. Noise, smells, unregistered livestock. The man's silence unnerved her more than his words might have. He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. He simply turned, walked back to his truck, and drove off without another word. But something in his gaze unsettled her. It wasn't defiance. It was calculation. That night, the wind picked up, rattling the old screen door as he sat inside his cabin, the fireplace crackling softly. He unsealed the packet left on his porch. Inside were pages of rules, demands, fines, he'd never seen before. The envelope wasn't even addressed properly. No legal identifiers. No formal signatures. Just a cover page printed with bold lettering and bullet points. A property like his off-grid, long-standing grandfathered into the county decades ago, wasn't even within HOA boundaries. At least, not the last time he checked. But that was before she showed up. He placed the last page on the table and stared at it. There was something off about the language terms that didn't align with actual enforcement law. The formatting mimicked legality but lacked its weight. She was trying to bluff her way through paper authority. He got up, walked to the bookshelf, and pulled out a thick binder. Inside were his deeds, zoning maps, original land surveys, and a signed letter from the county clerk confirming his exemption status. His fingers moved with quiet precision, pulling document after document, until he reached one filed over 20 years ago, a judicial order concerning municipal limits. His thumb traced the signature at the bottom. The next morning, as dew coated the dry grass and crows circled the distant pasture, he drove into town not to complain, but to observe. He sat through the entire HOA board meeting, unnoticed in the back. Karen led the meeting confidently, nodding to every nod, agreeing with herself more than anyone else in the room. When she brought up non-compliant ranches, a few heads turned. She didn't notice his presence. Not yet, but she would, and when she finally saw him stand, she'd realize that locking a gate didn't close the law behind it, only opened another one she couldn't control. The community hall had warped floors and flickering lights, but Karen stood at the front like it was her courtroom. She paced slowly, flipping pages and sipping from a cup, labeled, Madam President. Most of the chairs were empty, just a few elderly neighbors, a local handyman, and one teenager tapping his phone at the back. Seated near the bulletin board, the man remained still. His jacket was worn, collar up, hat low. No one noticed when he entered, and that's exactly how he wanted it. Karen tapped her pen against the podium and cleared her throat. Let's talk about non-compliant ranches. We've had reports of unauthorized fencing, improper livestock management, and structures lacking permits. These issues reflect poorly on our entire community. The handyman in the front raised his hand halfway. Wasn't that land always outside the association? Karen didn't hesitate. We voted last quarter to include the surrounding parcels. It's done. He got the notice, but he hadn't. Her file folder was thick, printed with maps, she claimed, were new, but anyone with sense could see the borders were hand-drawn over copied documents. Still, no one challenged her. Not yet, she continued. As of today, enforcement begins. Locks are on 3 of the gates. By next week, any unregistered livestock will be reported. The teenager finally looked up, muttering, ain't nobody voted on all that. Karen shot him a glance. The board did. This is to protect property value. If one lot slips, they all do. The man at the back leaned slightly forward. His eyes scanned the notice board beside him. Most of the pinned papers were faded newsletters, lost pet flyers, and a dated zoning poster, but one caught his attention. a copy of a special expansion request, with his lot ID, circled in red. The signature on it didn't match the clerk's at the county office. He folded the paper without a word and slipped it into his coat. Karen wrapped up the meeting with a dramatic pause. "We're here to bring order. Some owners forget that we're all part of something bigger." The man stood wood creaked beneath his boots as he walked slowly down the side of the room. Karen's confident voice trailed off when she saw him. "Can I help you?" she asked, voice forced light. He didn't answer immediately. He reached the podium, placed the stolen flyer on it, and turned it toward her. "That's a forged authorization form. That signature doesn't belong to any county officer." Karen blinked. "Excuse me." He tapped the name. "Judge William Hart." "That's me, and this is not how property expansion works. You can't annex private land with a community vote. You'd know that if you'd read the county charter, page 6, paragraph 3. The room was still. Karen's cheeks colored. "We have legal counsel. If you have a problem, take it up with the board." "I am," he said quietly. "Right now." The handyman stifled a chuckle. The teenager's eyes were wide. No one in that room knew what kind of man she had just challenged. "I suggest," the judge said calmly, "you remove the lock from my gate before sundown. If you don't, the sheriff will. I've already filed notice with the county." Karen's lips parted, but no words came. He tipped his hat once, turned and walked out. For the first time in her self-proclaimed presidency, Karen realized she might have miscalculated, and the paperwork she clung to like armor was about to become her heaviest chain. Karen stood behind the locked door of her office, pacing with her phone clutched in one hand and a legal pad in the other. She had called 3 people from the board already. None answered. One had even texted back, "Don't drag me into this." Her lips twitched in frustration. The man had blindsided her in public using her own document against her. She stared at the flyer he'd dropped at the podium. She knew the signature wasn't real, but it had been convenient. Clean, easy to print and easy to pass off to the rest of the board. No one had bothered to check dot until now. By mid-morning, a formal notice was printed on HOA letterhead though Karen had typed it alone. It was folded, sealed, and slipped into an unmarked envelope. No return address, no HOA logo, just his name, handwritten on the front. She drove past the ranch herself to deliver it. She didn't get out of her car. She slowed just enough to slide the envelope onto the mailbox lid, then sped off without looking back. Inside the cabin, Judge Hart sat at his desk, sharpening a pencil slowly. He heard the vehicle tires crunching gravel, heard them fade away. When he opened the door and saw the envelope, he didn't flinch. He brought it in, opened it carefully, and read the contents. It was a threat but dressed in polite language. It cited community violations, noted continued defiance, and warned of escalating consequences, including legal removal from the premises. It also included a fabricated board decision declaring his lot as inactive and delinquent. Even though he never consented to be part of the HOA in the first place. He placed the letter on the table, and picked up his phone not to call the sheriff, not yet. He called the county archives instead. That evening, a storm rolled in over the hills. Thunder rumbled as Karen sat in her kitchen, watching the rain slick her windows. Her phone buzzed. It was a new email. Her fingers trembled as she read it. The subject line was short, REHOA legitimacy request, Judge W. Hart. The message body contained only one sentence. The judge is correct. The HOA holds no jurisdiction over the parcel in question. Any enforcement will be considered unlawful trespass. Attached was a PDF, a scanned affidavit from the county recorder, verifying the parcel's independence and identifying Karen's attempted expansion filing as unauthorized. She threw the phone down, hands clenching at her temples. It wasn't just about the land now. It was about credibility. Power. The board would find out. The neighborhood would whisper. And she couldn't afford to lose control. The next day, the rancher found fresh tire marks along the fence line. Someone had driven up to the north gate overnight, left deep grooves in the wet ground, and departed without entering. He inspected the chain still intact, still locked, but now zip-tied to the fence post was another envelope. Inside, a printed notice demanding he appear before the disciplinary committee of the HOA within 72 hours. No date, no address, just a threat, meant to intimidate. He read it once and slid it into a file folder labeled evidence. Then, he picked up his pen and began drafting a response. Not to her, but to the Federal Regulatory Board. Karen didn't know yet, but every notice she sent him, every signature she forged. Every vote she claimed was part of a growing pile of federal violations. And the man she was baiting had once overseen cases against people who had done far less. She thought this was about fences and goats. She was about to learn what it meant to step into a courtroom with someone who built it. The HOA's disciplinary hearing was held in a neighbor's garage, converted with folding chairs, paper banners, and a plastic table stacked with clipboards. Karen sat at the head like a monarch, clipboard in hand, flanked by 2 board members, who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. But the chair reserved for the judge remained empty. She kept glancing at the driveway. He never arrived. Instead, at exactly 6:05 p.m., a black SUV pulled up and parked without ceremony. A plainclothes man stepped out, holding a sealed envelope. He entered the garage, asked for Karen Nettle, and handed her the document without a word. Then he left. Karen's throat tightened as she stared at the gold-embossed seal on the envelope. She opened it slowly, then skimmed the first page. Her hands went still. It was a cease and desist order issued by the Federal Property Oversight Board. Her name was listed directly. So was every board member. The letterhead was official. The language was precise. Her expansion claim had violated state law, and enforcement actions taken against Judge William Hart were now considered acts of harassment and trespass. The document ended with a stark warning. Further interference would lead to immediate legal action under federal jurisdiction. She swallowed hard. The rest of the board leaned in, reading over her shoulder. No one spoke. Karen stood up, brushing dust from her skirt. "Will, postpone this meeting. I need to speak with counsel," but she didn't have a lawyer. That night, her phone rang twice from unknown numbers. She didn't answer either. One left a voicemail, a low voice, simply stating, "You've crossed the wrong line." She unplugged her router and threw her phone into a drawer. Across town, the judge sat quietly in his cabin, writing notes under candlelight. His wood stove crackled beside him, and 3 folders lay open in front of him. One was marked HOA expansion filing, another trespass evidence, and the third bore Karen's name, clipped with a copy of the forged signature from her previous letter. He wasn't angry. He wasn't flustered. He was deliberate. The sheriff had called earlier to confirm the lock on his gate had been removed by someone anonymously, sometime around 2 a.m., but it didn't matter who did it. What mattered was that Karen was losing grip. He knew how people like her worked. When power slipped, they panicked. And panicked people always made mistakes. Sure enough, the next morning, his mailbox held another envelope. This one was different. Typed neatly, on personal letterhead, it was not from the HOA, it was from Karen directly. She had dropped the title. It was a plea, thinly veiled beneath formal words. She offered to de-escalate. Suggested a mutual agreement. Promised to respect parcel boundaries if he ceased further legal pressure. No apology. No admittance. Just a quiet bid to negotiate from behind closed doors. He didn't respond. Instead, he mailed her offer directly to the State Regulatory Council and added a note in the margin. Attempted informal settlement without HOA board authorization. Potential admission of guilt. He watched the mail truck leave from his porch and sipped his coffee slowly. Karen had removed the lock, folded her title, and tried to hide the trail. But it was far too late. The law she thought she could fake had come home. And the man she tried to corner wasn't finished, not by a long shot. 3 days passed in silence, no letters, no calls, no knocks at the door. Karen convinced herself that maybe, just maybe, things had cooled. She spent the afternoons watering her flower beds and rehearsing apologies in the mirror that she would never deliver. Her clipboard sat untouched for the first time in months. Then, early Thursday morning, a man in a gray jacket rang her doorbell. He wasn't from the sheriff's office. He didn't carry a badge. Only a leather folio and a federal ID clipped to his collar. He introduced himself without emotion and asked to speak about HOA financial records from the past fiscal year. Karen blinked, stammered, then tried to say her treasurer handled the books. But when the agent handed her a list of flagged transactions, her stomach turned cold. They weren't just asking. They knew. In that moment, she realized what the judge had done. He hadn't simply pushed back. He had opened every drawer she thought was locked. The investigator didn't raise his voice or threaten her. He simply stated that the HOA's 501c4 nonprofit status had been triggered for audit due to multiple filings from within the neighborhood, including irregular membership votes, unexplained administrative withdrawals, and sudden increases in collection fees. Karen nodded blankly through the rest of the conversation, trying not to show that her legs were trembling. The man thanked her and left. That afternoon, she tore through the HOA files in her office, bank statements, scanned receipts, membership rosters, all of it was there. But now it all looked fragile. A paper fortress built on shaky stones. She thought about the $9,000 beautification fund she had reallocated for private landscaping 2 months ago. She remembered the weekend trip she'd written off as a conference. She remembered the document she forged with Judge Hart's parcel ID, and she realized something else. This was no longer a dispute over a locked gate. It was a legal noose, tightening slowly, quietly, precisely. That evening, the judge received a quiet knock at his door. It wasn't a neighbor. It wasn't law enforcement. It was the HOA's treasurer, a wiry man with tired eyes, holding a manila envelope in both hands like it might burn him. He didn't ask to come in. He didn't offer excuses. He only said, "I didn't know what she was doing until last month. I didn't sign most of those checks." He handed the envelope to the judge and walked back to his car. Inside were copies of transaction reports, emails from Karen's personal address directing board decisions, without quorum, and a flash drive labeled minutes unrecorded. The judge sat back in his chair, reviewing every page as the cabin fell into silence. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just made notes. The next morning, Karen received a certified letter. Not from him but from the state attorney general's office. It was an official inquiry. She held the letter in both hands, barely breathing. In that moment, she realized the board was splintering. Allies were vanishing. No one was defending her now. She tried to call a meeting that night. Only one person showed up, not a board member, not a friend, a private investigator, and he had questions she couldn't answer. The file had been buried, deep, scanned, and mislabeled years ago in the county archive, but the judge knew exactly where to look. He'd seen it once, long ago, when presiding over a land dispute in another county. It was rare, obscure, and almost never invoked, but it was real. The clause had been embedded in the original county charter. No homeowners association could enforce policy on newly annexed land unless the annexation was unanimously approved by every directly affected property owner. With notarized signatures and filed documentation, any deviation nullified the claim and opened the board to civil liability. There had been no unanimous vote. There had been no filed documentation, only Karen's forged paperwork, passed around in whisper meetings and slipped under doors when no one answered. The judge didn't shout it from the rooftops. He gathered his evidence in silence, stacking the clause at the top, followed by the treasurer's disclosures, bank records, video footage of the lock being installed, and screenshots of board emails, many from Karen's personal address. Then, he filed the motion. Not to the local magistrate, but directly to the state's Community Regulation Authority. He included a cover letter signed with his full federal title, though now retired, and 3 witness statements from neighbors confirming they had never voted, nor been asked. When the package was sent, he didn't celebrate. He went outside, trimmed his fence line, and fed his horses, because he already knew how this would unfold. Across the neighborhood, Karen sat at her dining table, scanning the empty boxes she'd started packing. The house felt quieter now. She hadn't slept well in weeks. Her phone stayed silent. No calls, no messages, not even HOA chatter in the neighborhood group, and then it came. A white envelope slid into her mailbox. No fancy seals, no bold headings, just a single line on the top of the letter, RE Action, 743B, Charter Violation Report. She read it once, then again. Her face fell as the meaning settled in. The HOA had not only lost its authority over Judge Hart's property, had been declared void in its most recent expansion. Any rules passed since that expansion. Invalid. Every fine issued. Void. Every enforcement action. Every complaint letter. Every locked gate. All illegal. There was more. The final paragraph stated the board had 15 business days to submit full financial disclosures, itemized expense reports, and verifiable voting logs or face civil penalties and individual liability. Karen dropped the paper. For a moment, her chest tightened as if she couldn't breathe. Then she stood abruptly, moved to the liquor cabinet, and poured a drink she didn't finish. At sunset, she walked the sidewalk alone, eyes flicking toward the judge's ranch gate. It stood open now, no lock, no signs, just wind and dust, and the quiet defiance of someone who never needed to raise his voice. The next morning, the neighborhood received a printed notice on plain white paper. The HOA was officially suspended. Board meetings were canceled. All communications were to be directed through legal counsel. But no one needed translation. Karen was finished. The clipboard had turned to a chain around her neck hand. Every law she twisted had just snapped back into place. Karen paced the length of her living room, the faded curtains drawn tight. The notice of HOA suspension was supposed to stop the bleeding stall, the investigation long enough for her to regain control. But it had done the opposite. Now the silence from the neighborhood felt heavy. She hadn't seen a friendly face in weeks, even the ones who had stood by her. Those who used to nod approvingly as she cited community standards had vanished into closed garages and drawn blinds. Desperation crept in. She picked up her phone and called. The only board member still answering, Dale, the vice president. He was quiet on the line as she outlined her plan. "We'll hold an emergency vote," she said, voice tight. "Reinstate authority, purge the member causing conflict, and reset the board." Dale hesitated. "Aren't we under audit?" She pushed forward. "The charter doesn't forbid internal action during review. We hold a private quorum. It's legal enough." He didn't agree, but he didn't say no. That evening, a small group gathered inside Karen's garage. 6 folding chairs, a card table, and a single desk lamp casting long shadows. She wore her old blazer, the name tags still pinned to the lapel. She stood at the head of the table with a new packet of rules, backdated, unsigned. The vote was her plan to reclaim control by expelling the judge from HOA jurisdiction entirely. Symbolically, "We vote now," she said. "Majority rules. Any objections?" The garage door creaked. A cold breeze drifted in. No one had opened it. But there he was, Judge Hart, standing calmly in the doorway. Dressed not in uniform, but in quiet authority. Beside him stood a man in a dark coat, holding a camera. Behind them, a sheriff's deputy crossed his arms. No one spoke. Karen's hands trembled as she stepped forward. "This is a private meeting." The deputy responded. "Ma'am, this meeting qualifies as an organizational vote that directly affects a federal complaint. Under statute, it must be recorded and public if challenged." Karen looked toward the board. Dale stared at the floor. The judge stepped forward and set a folder on the card table. "Inside are your unsigned declarations, property reassessment, fraud, financial discrepancies, and to notarize statements from former board members. The audit committee has copies." Karen's face drained of color. "I'm not here to argue," the judge said. "I'm here to witness." He nodded once to the camera. The deputy remained silent. Karen tried to speak, but the words caught. The board members rose, one by one, folding their chairs. Dale lingered last, meeting her eyes only briefly. Then he followed the others into the night. She was alone. Outside, the sheriff taped a small notice to the garage door: an official. Freeze on all HOA activities until regulatory review concluded. Karen stood motionless as the taillights disappeared down the road. That night, her inbox was flooded. A legal notice from the state, a letter from her bank requesting verification of withdrawals, and one email with no sender, only a subject line: "We see everything now." Her clipboard lay on the floor beside the desk, cracked along the edge. What began as a private empire had collapsed into public reckoning, and the man she tried to drive out had just watched her walls fall down brick by brick. In front of everyone. The courtroom wasn't large, just 15 seats, a state seal on the wall, and a row of dull ceiling lights humming above. Karen sat at the defense table, hands clasped tightly together. Her eyes flicked toward the door every few seconds. But no one came in to support her. The judge presiding over the case wasn't William Hart. He sat in the gallery, one row from the back, silent and still. He wasn't there to testify. His work had already been done through documents, records on the trail Karen had left behind. The hearing began without ceremony. The state counsel read off the list of violations in a steady voice: unauthorized expansion of HOA boundaries, fraudulent filing of member votes, misuse of nonprofit funds, and harassment of an exempt landowner. Each charge echoed in the quiet room like drops into a well. Karen didn't speak. Her lawyer did what he could, tried to reframe the events as misunderstandings, misinterpretations, technical oversteps, but the evidence laid out over the weeks before this hearing didn't leave space for misunderstanding. There were forged signatures, altered maps, personal landscaping expenses paid from community funds, and fake compliance letters sent under HOA letterhead. The final blow came when the prosecutor read a sworn affidavit from the treasurer. "I was instructed to sign blank checks. I was told the documents would be handled later. I did not attend any votes Karen claimed I was part of. The judge's gavel came down gently, but decisively. The ruling, the HOA was to be officially dissolved. All fines and actions declared void, all member funds reimbursed under state oversight. Karen Nettle was barred from forming or leading any community organizations. And a separate civil case for damages was opened for individual residents to pursue. It was over. Outside the courthouse, Karen didn't speak to the cameras. She kept her head low, moving quickly to a waiting sedan. Reporters shouted questions, but she didn't answer. Inside the car, she stared straight ahead, face blank, hands shaking. Her kingdom was gone. The clipboard, the seal, the illusion of control all shattered. Far from the courthouse. At the edge of the high desert, the wind carried across Judge Hart's ranch. The gate, now open and rust-free, creaked lightly in the breeze. No locks, no signs, just land, stretching free. He stood on the porch, watching the sun drop behind the hills. The world was quiet again, not because someone gave him permission but because someone tried to take it, and failed. Later that week, he received a letter in the mail. It was handwritten. No return address. It said only, "You never raised your voice, but you never backed down. I never saw it coming. You were the judge the whole time." He read it once, folded it, and placed it in the same file where he kept the CIS-assist. He never replied. He didn't need to, because some battles are won not with noise but with patience, truth, and the slow, steady weight of the law. And some crowns are taken, not in public, they're handed back quietly, broken, by those who never should have worn them.